Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. Ancient Egypt had a pantheon of gods that was seemingly native to the country, and who actively evolved from the Old Kingdom to the New. So just why did the famous pharaoh, Ramesses the Great, also known as Ramesses II, associate himself with the Canaanite god of the Underworld, known as Hwron? In the excavation of San el Hagar at ancient Tanis in the northeast of the Delta region, a statue of Ramesses II was discovered, sucking on his finger and squatting like a little child, crowned with a solar disc under the protection of a great falcon. You'd be forgiven for thinking that we are looking at a representation of the great falcon god Horus. But on the four sides of the base of this iconic statue, there is an inscription that says, "The son of Ra, Ramesses, beloved of Amon, the beloved of Hauron." It isn't commonly known, but Middle Eastern deities were popular during the reign of the 19th Dynasty king, Ramesses the Great. But there is a deeper mystery with the specific god Hwron, whose introduction into Egypt wasn't because Ramesses the Great defeated the Hittite Empire and brought back the god as some have speculated. It was actually much earlier. The fact is that New Kingdom Egyptians actively worshipped a Canaanite deity, and this is a fact we need to address because I believe it holds central importance in New Kingdom Egyptian history. The founding ruler of the 19th dynasty was known as Horemheb, but according to historian Pierre Montet, his name is actually Hwron-em-heb. Interestingly, this pharaoh does record the fact that he settled Semitic refugees in Egypt, and therefore Montet believes that he had already adopted their god, Hauron. For balance, I should point out that a lot of Egyptologists disagree and believe that the name Horemheb is referring to Horus and not Hauron. But, due to the similarities of the names, are we also mistaking other references of Horus, and are some actually referring to Hauron? Also, in the late 19th dynasty, Harris Magical Papyrus, Hauron is mentioned 4 times, once in association with killing a wolf, twice as a valiant shepherd, and as you may know, the Semites in Egypt were known as shepherds, and in another instance, he is named with Horus as protector of the crops against wild beasts. This god is thought to originate in Syria, Palestine and Lebanon, and at Giza, a fragment of a sphinx was found inscribed with the words, Hauron of the Lebanon. As a god, his origins are considerably more ancient than 19th dynasty Egypt, but in Egypt it was actually most prominent during the turbulent 18th dynasty. In the reign of Amenhotep II, Hauron is named on a papyrus, and his name is also etched onto foundation deposits of the 18th dynasty Sphinx temple that was founded by the same king, located next to the Great Monument on its northeastern side. There is also another inscription at Giza on the limestone doorway of King Tutankhamun. The great Egyptian archaeologist and historian Selim Hassan said that foreigners known as Canaanites, of Syro-Canaanite origin, lived in Lower Egypt in the early 2nd millennium BC, and they worshipped the Sphinx under the name shown on the screen, which are corruptions of the name Hauron. In his excavations, he discovered evidence at Giza for a long-term Canaanite settlement, which was particularly focused on the Sphinx and its megalithic temples. No written inscription says why they are there or how they got there, but the Canaanites had certainly settled at Giza by the 18th dynasty. Their origins in Egypt could go much further back in time, but with the evidence at hand, we just don't know. Interestingly, there is a lost settlement, known in scriptures as Hauronia or Hauronopolis, thought to be the main Canaanite settlement in northern Egypt, and interestingly, there were 2 villages that existed in the last century, known as North and South Hauronia, located just 2 miles from Giza, and Selim Hassan found evidence of ancient buildings and stela at this location. Many votive stelae and other marks of respect to the Great Sphinx, inscribed and offered by the Canaanite community, have been found at Giza, and they called the Sphinx Hwron or Hauron. Both names refer to the same god, which was the Canaanite falcon deity, as shown in the Ramesses II statue from Tanis. The 18th dynasty Egyptians referred to the Sphinx specifically as Horomakhet, meaning Horus in the horizon, Horus of course being another falcon deity. As Graham Hancock mentions in Magicians of the Gods, Horomakhet and Hwron are directly linked on a number of inscriptions, not just by members of the Canaanite community, but also by the ancient Egyptians themselves. For example, a plaque of Amenhotep II refers to the pharaoh as beloved of Hwron Horomakhet. Another stela found at Giza reads, Adoration to Horomakhet in his name of Hwron. Thou art the only one who will exist till eternity while all people die. There was also another Giza stela that represents Hwron in the form of a falcon, besides an inscription that reads, "O Hwron, Horomaket, may he give favour and love." As noted by expert Christiane Zivi Koch, the variant Hauron was also frequently used. She said, "Hauron was so closely associated with Horomaket, the name of the Great Sphinx at Giza, that one addressed him indifferently as Horomaket Hauron or Hauron Horomaket." A papyrus document from the time of Ramesses II also mentions that labourers were taken to extract stone for the name shown on the screen, which experts understand refers to the Sphinx as a variant or corruption of the name Hauron. Before the end of the 18th dynasty, Hauron had become associated with Horus, and by the time of the reign of Ramesses III, the name Horus and Hauron are often seen coupled together. The fact is that from the beginning of the 18th dynasty and into the 19th and all the way up to later dynastic history, as well as being associated with the Egyptian falcon gods Horomaket, Herakti and Horus, the Sphinx was also associated with the Canaanite falcon god Hwron. In time, as the Harris Magical Papyrus shows, Horus and Hauron became fused together. These are two gods distinct from each other, yet similar in form, as noted by Selim Hassan. We saw earlier how Hwron is shown protecting Ramesses II in the Tanis statue, but when we see falcons or hawks protecting the king on other Egyptian art, how many are actually depicting Hwron and not Horus? Although this is a very bad black and white picture, here we are looking at a stela with the name Hwron inscribed. In the middle there is a niche, and in the centre is a mummified hawk or falcon, and this is evidence for Hwron also being a god of the dead. Above the mummified falcon is a winged disc, but as Selim Hassan says, the upward curve of the wings shows that this piece of art is not Egyptian in origin. But why were the Canaanites of Egypt, and also the 18th dynasty Egyptian pharaohs, both associating the Sphinx with gods that were portrayed primarily as falcons, when we are told that the Sphinx was a lion with the head of the 4th dynasty king Khafre? Could it be that before the 18th dynasty, the Sphinx did actually have a carved falcon head, linking it to the ancient Giza god Sokar, as I alleged in my previous videos, linked below in the description? As stated in these videos, I am not yet convinced there is any concrete physical evidence that the Sphinx was ever a lion or any other kind of four-legged animal in its earliest incarnation, and I hypothesize that it was actually a mound of rock associated with the primal, pre-dynastic or Old Kingdom Egyptian god Sokar. His emblem was the falcon, and we see on his ritual Henu bark boat a falcon head extending from a mound, which some say is a depiction of the primordial mound. I hypothesized that before the pharaonic head of the Sphinx that we see today, it was actually carved into a falcon head, extending from a mound, in homage to Sokar in the Giza sacred landscape. The evidence used by Egyptologists to say that the Sphinx was originally a lion are claws on the hind paws etched into the member 1 unit of limestone bedrock of the Sphinx. But the fact they have survived through the huge amounts of weathering says to me that these are not original features. I believe they are later carvings from when the mound was first converted into a lion. Therefore, I propose a different timeline of events. The only thing that seems to make sense to me is that the Canaanite settlers stumbled across an enormous statue of a falcon poking out of the forgotten Giza sands. The ritual landscape of Giza was out of use and out of favour for many years, as evidence suggests the Sphinx was up to its neck in sand, especially during the times of Thutmose IV, as the famous Dream Stela records. A forgotten monument out of use and little written about it means it isn't impossible that the 18th dynasty Egyptians, after a period of change, with the Hyksos finally banished from the north, may well have been unaware of Sokar's association with the Sphinx, and with the monument covered in sand, it was more than likely in the 18th dynasty an Old Kingdom ruin. The Canaanites, who are possibly new to the land of Egypt, would have seen a giant statue of their own falcon god Hwron, and therefore Giza would be a focal point for the Canaanites and an obvious place to start their settlement. This would certainly have caught the attention of the 18th dynasty pharaohs, and it is no surprise that we see the rise of a more obscure ancient Egyptian deity and the beginning of the cult of the Sphinx in the 18th dynasty. Politically, there couldn't be an enormous statue of a Canaanite falcon god amongst the pyramids in Lower Egypt, with the Canaanite community making pilgrimages and offerings. I think the Canaanites' attention of the Sphinx is exactly why the pharaohs took a great interest in the ancient monument at this time. I believe they laid their claims over the monument, ensuring that his name was clearly known as Horomaket, a representation of the Old Kingdom god Herakti. But, unwilling to upset the growing Canaanite community of Giza, their god Hwron was acknowledged in relation to the Sphinx. I don't think that the 18th dynasty cult of the Sphinx was the re-emergence of an ancient pre-dynastic or Old Kingdom Sphinx cult like I once believed. No, I think what we actually see in the 18th dynasty is a reaction to the Canaanites, an attempt to absorb one god into another. This has been seen many times in history, especially during the Roman era when the cult of the Egyptian goddess Isis transformed into the cult of the Virgin Mary, with the latter overprinting the Egyptian Isis. It's a way to control and to please the people, allow them to continue worshipping their god but give he or she a new name. So Hauron of the Canaanites became Hauron Horomakhet in the hope he would eventually just become Horomakhet, a name with two different meanings to two different sets of people. I would even go one step further and say that Hauron is the true 18th dynasty identity of the Sphinx. Maybe Horomakhet was actually Hauronakhet, and instead of meaning Horus in the horizon, it actually means something else. As well as meaning horizon, Akhet also means the season of the flood, also known as the inundation, and the time when Robert Temple claims the Nile reached the Giza plateau and filled the Sphinx enclosure with water. Therefore, if the original name of the Sphinx was Hauronakhet, it may be referring to when the monument was surrounded by floodwaters. Akhet can also mean tomb, so it may also mean the tomb of Hauron. Maybe the name given to the Sphinx was meant to mean two different things to two different sets of people, aligning the two great falcon gods of two different cultures. If the Sphinx was, as we are told, a lion-bodied monument with the head of a 4th dynasty pharaoh, then why would the Canaanites and the 18th dynasty Egyptians associate the Sphinx with their respective falcon gods, Hwron and Horus? To me, this makes no sense, unless of course the Sphinx was discovered in the 18th dynasty with a falcon head, as I believe. To be clear, the name Horomakhet is the personal name of the Great Sphinx monument, and Harakti, which means Horus, the dweller in the horizon, is the name of the god that the Sphinx is portraying. Harakti was first mentioned in the pyramid text of the Old Kingdom, and was depicted as a falcon or falcon-headed man. In the 18th dynasty, this god is represented by a sphinx, either human or falcon-headed, as a falcon-headed man, or simply in his original form as a falcon. The Egyptians, when referencing the Sphinx, either call it Horomakhet, its 18th dynasty name, or the more ancient god Harakti. But, to my knowledge, there is no evidence that the Sphinx was associated with Harakti until the New Kingdom. I think the rise of this god and its association with the Sphinx was a knee-jerk reaction to the popularity of the Canaanite god Hauron. As well as being a falcon god, the Canaanite Hauron also lived in the desert and had power over the evil forces that lurked in this dangerous place. Hauron in the desert also represented the Underworld, and Giza, as we know, was once known as Rostau, the location of Sokar's festival, which involved a representation of the Underworld. Sokar was the primal Egyptian god of the dead, and Hauron, as we have seen, was also a god of the dead. Some speculate that the sole reason why the Canaanites associated the Sphinx with Hauron is because it was found in a sand-filled depression in the desert. But would a weathered head of the Egyptian king Khafre, as Egyptologists say, a weathered head of the god Anubis or a Middle Kingdom king, as Robert Temple says, or a weathered head of a lion, really cause a Canaanite community to worship it as their desert falcon god, Hauron? For me, this doesn't work. Surely it would have had to have some resemblance to their god in the first place. The desert association was certainly an important aspect, as we see the Egyptians call Horomakhet Lord of the Desert or He Who Dwells in the Desert. But to fully make the association, I think it had to have had a carved falcon head. Maybe we get more of a clue of the true origins of the Sphinx under the reign of Ramesses II. We see that there is a statue of Hauron as a falcon protecting the king, portrayed as a child, at Tanis. But there are also sphinxes commissioned in his reign showing a falcon head on the body of a lion. Is this a reference to the great sphinx god Hauron Horomakhet? I think it's certainly possible. So, when was the falcon mound first transformed into a sphinx lion? It's purely guesswork based on everything I've read, but I would suggest that this was done in the 18th dynasty by either Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, or his son Thutmose IV. Giving Hauron the face of the king of Egypt, who was believed to be a living god, may have been a political move by the pharaoh. It was a royal acknowledgement of the Canaanite god, but also a way that the Egyptians could stop there being a clear image of a Canaanite god in the middle of the sacred landscape of Giza. Evidence suggests that this Canaanite god, Hwron Horomakhet, was the origin of Akhenaten's one true god, as a stela found at the Sphinx, as I've mentioned previously, is inscribed with the following words: Adoration to Horomakhet, in his name of Hwron. I give praise to thy beautiful face, I make content thy beauties. Thou art the only one who will exist till eternity, while all people will die. Here, as Selim Hassan says in his book, linked below in the description, we see a definite declaration that Hwron is a god who is identified with Horomakhet, and that these two are regarded as a personification of the one eternal god. It appears that Artanism, the religion of King Akhenaten, may have actually been an adoption of a foreign Canaanite god, as he shunned the Egyptian pantheon away. No wonder it was never truly accepted by the masses, but there is clear evidence that Hwron lived on, as seen by the artifacts found from the 19th dynasty. The final part of this video goes to Amenhotep II, and not only did he call the Sphinx Hwron Horomakhet, but on his stela at Giza it was written the Pyramids of Horomakhet. Did the 18th dynasty Egyptians believe the whole Giza plateau was the work of an outside influence? Your guess is as good as mine. I have just launched a new YouTube channel called Space and Planet, which focuses on Earth and space science news and independent scientific research from around the world. Please subscribe now to give my new channel a head start. I have placed a link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.